When Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here was rediscovered during the 2016 election, many new American readers were stunned by the novel's insights. Published commentary from CNN to NPR to the New York Times often circle around a basic question. How could a 1935 novel by a long neglected author be so perceptive about American politics and populism in particular? The haunting familiarity of Buzz Winthrop as a version of Donald Trump was often discussed, with many articles quoting the following description of Winthrop, quote, "The senator was vulgar, almost illiterate, a public liar easily detected, and in his ideas, almost idiotic, while his celebrated piety was that of a traveling salesman for church furniture, and his yet more celebrated humor, the sly cynicism of a country store." While these articles showed appreciation for such satire and Lewis's narrative as an American political warning, the international complexities that produced the novel were not fully understood at this time. This paper will trace It Can't Happen Here as a multi-layered transatlantic text informed not only by American political critique, but also by Lewis's European travels and connections. More specifically, I believe the novel can be read not just as a political warning to America, but as an American novel distinctly informed by German exile literature. Such a perspective challenges the basic perception of Lewis as an author defined by the Midwest. Even though Lewis always highlighted his middlebrow Americanness while in Europe, his cheeky gestures were on display even at the height of his fame, such as when he departed to receive the Nobel Prize, posing with a practical book worthy of Babbitt, Swedish in 10 lessons. Still, a decade of expatriate life and travels in the 1920s left its mark with repeated year-long stays in Europe, especially in England and Italy. Lewis's Anglophile and Italophile tendencies gradually allowed for a greater prominence of Germany, especially Berlin, by the late 1920s. Dorothy Thompson's pivotal role is well known, as traced by Frederick Betz, Jörg Tunica, and Carino von Tippelskirch, among others. While adding to this research, I will highlight an additional writer who proves distinctly important for Lewis, leading to It Can't Happen Here, the best-selling German Jewish novelist, Leon Feuchtwanger. Through Feuchtwanger, Lewis's links to German exile literature can be highlighted, which include Thomas Mann, as well as daughter and son Erika and Klaus, Arnold Zweig, and others. In these connections, forged in Weimar Germany pre-exile, my sense is that Feuchtwanger was most important for the insights that would result in It Can't Happen Here. Oh, sorry, there might be someone not muted. The years 1927 and 28 proved central to these developments. Lewis traveled to Berlin for the second time. In contrast to a brief stay in 1925, 1927 suddenly resulted in a 6-month-long stay and in an even more extended European tour. Someone named Dorothy Thompson caused a change in plans. Lewis would meet Thompson and fall in love within 2 days of arriving. While primarily an Anglophile and Italophile, Lewis was drawn to Germany through the market success of his books and his own interest in German migration to the Midwest. Still, Lewis wouldn't have stayed in Berlin so long had he not met Thompson. The stay lasted from July 1927 to February 1928, with intermittent travels to Austria, England, and Russia. By September, Lewis had settled at the Hercules House near the Tiergarten postcard there. And here he would write The Man Who Knew Coolidge and start Dodsworth, his definitive expatriate novel. Dodsworth would be dedicated to Thompson and include extensive scenes in Berlin. Note here that in William Wyler's otherwise wonderful film adaptation in 1936, the scenes in Berlin are conspicuously absent. In Germany, in the late 1920s, though, personal, artistic, and business interests caught up with Lewis. While Weimar Berlin's expatriates have long been associated with Christopher Isherwood, who settled there in November 1929, Lewis and Thompson arguably became the city's most famous American expats pre-Great Depression. Their return to Berlin was then celebrated in December 1930, following Lewis's award of the Nobel Prize. And here are just two famous photos of that Berlin moment. It's fascinating to look at. So here is Lewis at the balcony of a very famous Hotel Adlon in Berlin, December 1930. And Thompson and Lewis together in Berlin, same photo series following the Nobel Prize. And and you can see the Brandenburg Gate in the background with both of them. Lewis's connections to Weimar literary culture were indeed at their peak between 1927 and 1930. It was here that his exchange with Leon Feuchtwanger began. Feuchtwanger was a Bavarian Jewish author and leftist playwright closely connected to Munich's literary circles, including Bertolt Brecht and Thomas Mann. He gradually shifted from playwright to popular historical novelist, however, with the literary sensation of his 1925 novel, Jew Süß, which dealt with the life of Joseph Süß Oppenheimer, an 18th century businessman and political advisor at the court of Württemberg. The novel proved a bestseller in Germany, Britain, and America. It was translated into English by the famous couple, Willa and Edwin Muir, the original translators of Franz Kafka. Here you can see their names prominently shown in the English edition and the 16th edition, an indication of its bestseller status. In the same year as Aerosmith, Feuchtwanger thus achieved his own celebrated bestseller and moved from Munich to Berlin with his wife, Martha.
Yeah, that's a famous picture too.
That one too, yeah, from the 30s. I think that's them in France, actually, but it's kind of from the era. He was thus in Berlin to hear about Lewis's extended visit, though it appears they did not manage a personal get-together at this time. Still, Feuchtwanger was eager to meet Lewis. As a historical novelist, he was devoted to Lewis's writings, especially Babbitt, published in German translation in 1924. His encounter with Babbitt was like a lightning strike. And he states that Lewis saw, quote, his own period in historical perspective, with Babbitt having the status as a kind of unequivocal historical figure. In this sense, Feuchtwanger considers the book as a kind of historical novel of the present. Babbitt also informed his perception of America until his eventual exile to Los Angeles in 1940. Feuchtwanger's fandom was also so great that in 1925, he began publishing prose poems about an American Babbitt for a Berlin newspaper, the Berliner Tageblatt, eventually published as Pep, J.L. Wetcheek's American Songbook. He presented the poems as though they were translations of a fictional American author named J.L. Wetcheek, a wonderful pseudonym that was a little English translation of his own name.
Yeah.
So here's the secret. Feuchtwanger.
Yeah.
Feucht means wet, and Wange means cheek in German, aka J.L. Wetcheek.
Yeah, great.
Eventually, the disguise was uncovered, though the poems remained popular. When he heard about Lewis's 1927 visit, he wrote in late July to inform him of the planned publication of Pep. Lewis was touched, and in a letter to Alf Harcourt, following a request that all his novels be sent to Dorothy, he writes, quote, "The Berliners have been particularly nice to me, and I have had a lot of literary editors come and call on me. Especially nice has been Leon Feuchtwanger, the author of Jew Süß, who wants to dedicate a new book to me." Thompson would eventually translate Pep in 1929, and it includes a wonderful dedication of Feuchtwanger with a lovely drawing by Konstantin Ladyalov, artist for the Saturday Evening Post, among others. And here is the dedication for that translation. It states, "For that good American, Sinclair Lewis, in admiration and comradeship." And I'll just give a quick moment to take a look at that. It's pretty.
Yeah, that's good.
And there's other drawings by Ladyalov in throughout the book. Feuchtwanger further gave a talk on a Berlin radio about Lewis in 1927, which was printed in the Magdeburgische Zeitung following the 1930 Nobel. The manuscript is preserved at the Feuchtwanger Memorial Library, and you can see on this page, it is part of a series about Nobel winners called Why They Received the Nobel Prize. You can also see below, it says Wirkliches Amerika, that means Real America, a speech about Sinclair Lewis by Leon Feuchtwanger. On this occasion, I'm also happy to announce that the first translation of the speech will appear in the next edition of the newsletter, of the Society newsletter.
Great, great.
Feuchtwanger was not alone in his appreciation of Lewis, though, as Arnold Zweig, not related to Stefan Zweig, but a prominent Berlin novelist himself, also translated in America, published an improvisation on Sinclair Lewis on the occasion of the award and the Literatur. And the New York Times saw fit to highlight Lewis's Berlin reception in its announcement of the award. So that was part of the same announcement of Lewis's Nobel Prize. These exchanges, to be sure, were still in an era of relative political stability in wonderful Weimar Berlin. When Feuchtwanger and Lewis would finally meet personally in Berlin in January 1931, however, the Nazi Party had increased its share of the vote from 2.6% in 1928 to a shocking 18.3% in 1930. It would only get worse from there, with 37.3% in 1932. The ominous feelings of it can happen here were emerging, but Feuchtwanger was well placed to provide an initial warning. Influenced by Babbitt's Zenith, he wrote his own historical novel of the present dealing with his Bavarian roots, a 1930 novel called Success, which dealt with early 1920s Munich leading up to the beer hall putsch. A landmark in Weimar literature, Success marked the first satirical depiction of Hitler and the Nazi Party in German literature, and it would be called a near masterpiece in Time magazine. Initially conceived in 1927, Feuchtwanger did not realize how ominous it would appear when published in 1930, not to mention dangerous for himself. The satire resulted in Feuchtwanger's immediate need for exile to France in 1933. He then swiftly wrote a new novel, The Oppermanns, dealing with a Berlin Jewish family that witnesses the Nazi takeover before fleeing. This is a much shorter, but still one of his best novels and very perceptive about politics in 1933. So if you're looking to explore more about Feuchtwanger, I recommend this novel as a great start. At this time, Lewis was experiencing his own pressures in the eventual banning of his books in Nazi Germany. Indeed, it is crucial to note that the authors in Weimar Germany who Lewis and Thompson knew would eventually all become exiles. This includes Thomas Mann, whose Nobel Prize had been given in 1929, and Lewis then in 1930. And Lewis and Thompson actually met Mann's daughter and son, Erika and Klaus, in 1927, themselves prominent artist activists in the Mann family and representing the new Weimar generation in Berlin. They had, like Feuchtwanger, moved from Munich to Berlin, with Thomas Mann remaining in Bavaria. They were also fans and writing in the following in their 1939 book, Escape to Life, about German exiles in the 1930s, quote, "During the years of the Weimar Republic, Lewis was one of the most famous non-German writers in Germany. We all knew and admired Babbitt and other books of his." Lewis was himself threatened with censorship in Nazi Germany in 1933 when Klaus Mann included his name in an anti-Nazi journal. And a year later, Dorothy Thompson herself was the first American journalist expelled from Germany, an event reported on across America, such as in the Knoxville Journal, right here. Given this background, It Can't Happen Here can be read as a kind of hybrid German exile novel translated into American culture. Weimar legacies also continued as Thompson continued to host exiles at twin farms in Vermont, and It Can't Happen Here is partly a tribute to their Vermont life. Borrowing on LA's celebrated image of the Villa Aurora and Thomas Mann House as Weimar on the Pacific, Carino von Tippelskirch called Twin Farms Central Europe and Vermont. Most tellingly, Lewis mentions both Thomas Mann and Feuchtwanger in the novel. Canada becomes a North American exile answer comparable to France, England, and Switzerland, and later California. The concerns about economic survival for the common man remain a theme, though, when Vermont journalist Doremus Jessup contemplates exile. And here's the reference, quote, "It was all very well to talk about men like Thomas Mann and Leon Feuchtwanger and Romain Rolland, who in exile remained writers whose every word was in demand, about Professor Einstein or Salvemini, or under corporism, about the recently exiled or self-exiled Americans. But what was an ordinary newspaper hack, especially if he was over 45, to do in a strange land?" After an initial attempt at flight and later imprisonment in a concentration camp, Jessup becomes an exiled American journalist. The novel concludes with Jessup then joining subversive American efforts with his clandestine border crossing from Canada into a certain state called Minnesota. Lewis thus emphasizes the geographic location of his two homes, Vermont and Minnesota, as border states to Canada. It Can't Happen Here then blends tropes of European exile by reinterpreting and updating the experiences of the Underground Railroad and African-American exile to the northern states and Canada. Lewis's exile network is called the New Underground. This theme further anticipates discourses about Canadian exile in the eras of the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, and beyond. Such connections help to explain not only the biting and urgent political critique of It Can't Happen Here, but also the transatlantic scope of its vision. While an American warning, Lewis's novel reveals a transatlantic frame informed by the German exiles and Lewis's life with Dorothy in Vermont. It is thus not surprising that It Can't Happen Here was the only American novel to be translated into German for the exile publishing house Querido in 1936. This ensured that Lewis would be banned from Nazi Germany in perpetuity. Frederick Betz has traced the biography of that translator, Hans Meisel, another German exile, to America. It was Meisel's original translation that was used also in the reissuing of It Can't Happen Here in Germany in 2017. The enduring success of It Can't Happen Here, a novel partly made possible by the extraordinary success of Babbitt in Weimar, Germany, is seen in its transatlantic resonance with both American readers and German exiles. Thomas Mann's children, Erika and Klaus, in their book, Escape to Life, the same book about 1930s exile networks, would thus list Thompson and Lewis first in their chapter entitled Friends in America. They conclude with the 1937 tribute to Lewis's novel after their 1927 Berlin meeting. And here's the conclusion. Quote, "When we came back to New York 10 years later, we thanked him for his book, It Can't Happen Here. He had both impressed and startled us. For us, It Can't Happen Here is not only a supreme literary achievement, it is unquestionably one of its author's most powerful works. More than all that, it is a great political deed, or simply a great deed. He pressed our hands. He knew why we were here. He knew what we had lost, for he had lost something too." Thank you.